We're going to spend the next hour or so talking about, well, we may talk about a lot of things. I don't even want to say what we may be talking about, but we're going to be talking about a lot over the next hour. So we have Bishop Ken Carder, who I guess I'm the host, but this is your thing. So I'm not sure what we call each other here, but I've got Bishop Ken Carder. I think this is the third time we've done this.
Right.
Right. And
that's correct.
His guest today is Janet Wolf. Janet's worked with poverty rights organizations. She's been, Janet, I looked this up. She's been a United Methodist pastor, rural and urban congregations. You've been a college and a seminary professor. Well, she's also, I'm sure there's several books you've written, but she's the author of Practicing Resurrection, The Gospel of Mark, and Radical Discipleship. Bishop Carder, you know him. You've probably been here with us before. His latest book is Shifting Mark. I don't know if that's your latest book or not. You just republished one with Abington, or you are right now, didn't you?
Well, there was one that was republished that Lacey Warner and I did on practicing leadership in the Wesleyan tradition.
Great, and he did one for Market Square called Shifting Marches. I'm sure many of you all are familiar with that book. Well, one of the things I've learned when I do these conversations with Bishop Carder and his friends is that I don't have to do very much. Usually I ask a question and they just take off and go. So we're going to do that. But I tell you, I'm going to surprise you because I've got a question I'm going to start with that I didn't tell you I was going to ask. It's more of a personal question. I'd love to know how you two got to know each other. Where did you first meet?
Do you want to say that?
Well, I was first introduced to be alert to Janet.
Warned probably.
No, it was when I was at the Oxford Institute in 1992. I had just been elected to the episcopacy from Church Street in Knoxville, and a friend of mine who had been, we had been in consultation, and I'd read his book, Good News to the Poor, John Wesley's Evangelical Economics. Ted Jennings said, will you be in my working group? I want you there to help defend me. Well, he never needs any defense. But when he knew that I was going to Nashville, he said, there is a pastor in Nashville that I want you to be sure to connect with. And her name is Janet Wolf. And so when I arrived in Nashville, she was one of those persons that I made contact with. I had her name in the back of my mind, and I think, Janet, you were serving down on a circuit down on the southern border of Tennessee near Alabama at the time.
Absolutely, yeah. And you were a source of wisdom and support and encouragement and persistence and patience and generosity and grit. You salvaged many days for me in the middle of some hard struggles. I thank you for both your fierce faith and your friendship over time. It's been a gift, continues to be a gift for me and many.
Well, you've been a gift to me too, Janet, with your persistence, your prophetic voice, and your vision of what the church ought to be. And I had the privilege of serving in ministry with you. She also became the chair of a task force that we tried to do something very systemic in the Nashville area in implementing the Episcopal Initiative on Children and Poverty. And she chaired that task force and we then employed a mutual friend, Harmon Ray, who became a staff member working with us. So we have a long history dating back to 1992.
We do, and we haven't lost.
I'm so fortunate to get to spend time with you all. When you get to know Bishop Ken Carder, the whole world opens up to you. You meet all kinds of people. And so it's just been fascinating for me. Well, let's go ahead and start our conversation. We're going to talk about the church a lot today, I feel certain. It's a critical time in the life of the church. It's a critical time for the church to step up. I think we'd all agree and be what the church should be. My question to you as we begin today, and Bishop Carder, why don't you start with this? Where do you think, and what's your vision of where the church should be?
The church should be where always where it is called to be, and that's where the hurting places of the world and the broken places of the world. But this is a particularly volatile and important time because the church is called to be a visible, embodied sign, foretaste, and instrument of God's vision for the world. We're to be an outpost of God's vision for the world, and God dreams of a world where love dominates all reality, and the human family is one, and all live in justice. And the church exists by the title of our webinar today. The church exists to nurture compassion and justice and transformation, and to be an alternative to a world of injustice, oppression, cruelty, and hatred. And the lines are clearly drawn in the modern world.
Amen. Amen. And I mean, I guess I think often of the book of Revelation. I know it's been misused with crazy things, but for me, it's a powerful book that says, you know, empire has corrupted the church. And so what is it we do so that we're not marked by empire? We are clearly a community that belongs to Jesus and that follows in the way of Jesus, and that engages, as Walter Wink and Ted Jennings often pushed us, and Ted Myers, to be a movement, not simply an institution, not ever an institution, but a community that ignites a movement towards justice, towards, we call in the National Council of Elders, creating, sustaining, strengthening a culture of peace rooted in justice. And I think it's an urgent time for the church to be honest about the ways we have been complicit, become theological justifiers for so many of the systems and structures and policies and theologies that are killing people day after day.
Yes, I think we have lost our, well, we have substituted the penultimate for the ultimate. The church, as I understand it, is at best a penultimate, that it is to be a sign of that which is ultimate. It is to embody that which is ultimate. But the institutional church is not the kingdom of God. And we so often, and I admit, as a bishop of the church, I've been involved in the structures and maintaining the institution. And the institutions are important, but it's so easy to be committed to the institution that we forget why the institution exists. We forget its mission. And our mission is to give ourselves away on behalf of the reign of God in the world, or what Jesus called the kingdom of God. And I know that language is bothersome, but it's the creation of a beloved community where justice permeates all relationships. And I think it's important that we define that justice from a biblical perspective is not simply it's not primarily the blindfolded lady with the weighing the scales. Justice in God's sight is weighted on behalf of the least and most vulnerable, so that we know something is just by asking the question, what is its impact on the least and most vulnerable? And that in the Hebrew scriptures is the orphans, the widows, and the immigrants, the sojourners. And the church is to join God's defense and nurturing and the mutual flourishing of the whole of creation.
What do you see as the major obstacles for the church? What do you see as the major obstacles for the church being that community of compassion, of justice?
My friend Ndume Olatusani, who was caged for 21 years on Tennessee's death row for a crime he didn't commit, was in another 7 years before he was released, entirely innocent, often said, all those years, church folks coming in trying to save my soul. Hell, I didn't need anybody save my soul. I need somebody save my ass. And I think that is where the church has been stuck. have become a community that thinks we have something to offer the world instead of listening to the world, being present with the world, and dismantling the systems and structures and policies and theologies that continue to push people, as Howard Thurman said, with their backs against a wall. That's where the story was born. That's where Jesus spent time in communities with people with their backs against the wall. And when we stand at a distance, we inevitably become theological justifiers for all those systems. So both Walter Wink and Ted Jennings talk about what it means to be kept chaplains of an unjust order, what it means for the church to be captured by these systems so that we no longer claim this story with any authenticity. I mean, I think of, they're going to execute a friend of mine tomorrow in the state of Tennessee, Donald Middlebrooks. And I think of the church claiming this story of Jesus, who was arrested and convicted and caged and criminalized on trumped up charges, executed in a state-sanctioned murder with the complicity of religious authorities. What does it mean for us to claim that story and be so absent from the people in cages and then become justifiers for the death penalty and other forms of battering? Yeah.
I would strongly affirm that, Janet. Thank you very much for that. I think an obstacle has also been our preoccupation with individualism. That we, and as I look back over my long years in various forms of ministry, as a pastor, and as a bishop, as a teacher, but the focus, I have emphasized the importance of understanding the doctrines of the church, understanding the teachings of Jesus, understanding the Bible cognitively, beliefs, having the proper beliefs. And I've spent a lot of time in writing and preaching and teaching around those issues. And I think those are important. But what I look back and have to admit that I did not sufficiently focus on how do you shape communities that embody those doctrines. For example, it's one thing to preach the Imago Dei, that all people are created in the image of God, and therefore every person has inherent worth and dignity, and that every person is inherently loved and valued by God. It's one thing to proclaim that, to teach that, to study about that, and even to recite the creeds and sing the hymns about it. But it's another thing to actually embody that in community, to where the community treats people as though they are beloved children of God. And that was brought home to me more poignantly in my late wife's journey with dementia. She forgot who Jesus was. Does that mean she was no longer a disciple of Jesus? Or could no longer be an instrument of God's flow of love in the world? No. So how do we shape communities? And one of the things that we've emphasized is the individual salvation. As your friend said, I don't need somebody to save my soul, I need somebody to save my ass. We may need somebody to save our communities, because we are shaped by our communities. And therefore, how do we form communities? And the emphasis on individual salvation at the expense of the social dimensions of salvation. That there's not a personal gospel and a social gospel. There is one gospel about the love of God poured out for all creation. And it has personal and social and cosmic ramifications. And that's the challenge, the church, and that's the obstacle. But I think, Janet, you're right. We've been captured by these lesser gods. Christian nationalism now it's always been one of a dominant god, or nationalism, or patriotism, loyalty to country, loyalty to country is fine, but final loyalty is to the reign of God. And so how do we shape communities that embody our doctrines is a major challenge, I think. And I think another thing, Janet, and you've run up against this an awful lot, we have trouble dealing with conflict. And and therefore we shy away from speaking the truth of the gospel. And I remember, Janet, when you were pastor of Hobson, I wish I had the privilege of appointing you, or you may thank me or ask for an apology.
Oh, I thank you. It was a gift in the end. It was a journey.
But you used to use the language a lot of, we've got to live the Jesus story. And to me, that puts it very simply. And if we really understand the Jesus story, it's much broader than my own personal happiness and well-being. The Jesus story is a story about systems, about relationships,
Right.
about communities. And our Wesleyan tradition, we've so emphasized personal salvation that we've forgotten that Wesley, particularly later in his life, his image of salvation was holistic. So the whole of creation will be healed and transformed. And so the church has had too narrow of a vision, meet my personal needs, solve my personal problems, give me personal security in my relationship with God. But the reign of God is about more than my personal happiness.
Right. And I think Wesley would be absolutely appalled at all our buildings. I mean, he used to say, build tall buildings and then you're going to need rich people. And then he said, there goes the gospel. That the whole notion of becoming some kind of institution was inherently a contradiction to the gospel. So it's interesting to figure out the many ways we have shaved off the sharp edges so that we're not challenged and we're not discomforted and we're not displaced from the places of power and privilege that we have sought. I do think that one of the struggles for the church has been not only the distance from those who are day after day battered, assaulted, belittled, criminalized, and caged by all these systems and structures and policies and theologies, but our investment in justice rather than charity. So designing ministry to and for as if we have answers rather than with, knowing that the people with the problems are the people with the solutions, that those of us who are not in the middle of a particular struggle have no right and no real wisdom on resolving the struggle or figuring out what makes the most sense. I remember sitting in a circle inside the prison, and you've been in the circle, so you know, but we always offer our names and then one question that people respond to. And Fred, who had been on death row for a number of years and was now moving to the low side, the question was, what are you grateful for? And his answer was grass. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, we just had a 2-hour thick discussion and you're going to talk about dope, marijuana. But I said, would you like to say more about that? And he said, yeah, grass, because when you're on death row, all you touch is concrete and steel. So yeah, I get out. In the cage, and we put our hands through the wire. Everybody tries it to reach the grass, and you can't, but don't nobody not try. And when we get out, we just fall in the grass and laugh to touch something green and living. And it reminds me over and over again how many times I have totally misunderstood what someone said or some situation, how little I have had to add for what might be the solution to a particular problem because it was not mine. Philip Gorovich wrote a book on Rwanda, and he talks about how power is the ability to force others to inhabit your version of their reality. And that's what charity does, right? The churches define other folks' reality and then force folks to fit into that.
Yeah, and you're getting at what I think the church exists to be an incarnation of the power and love of God in the world. We are to embody that flesh and blood. And one of the hindrances, one of the obstacles is that we live in segregated, homogeneous societies and communities. And therefore we live in our little cocoons of, for many of us, affluence, whiteness, and what you're saying about, when Jesus talks about where you want to find me, Matthew 25, which we quote all the time. And I've said to many students and to congregations, when Jesus said, if you want to find me, or where you will find me, in the prisons, among the sick, among the poor, it wasn't multiple choice.
Right.
It was really, this is where I am among the suffering of the world. And I was thinking of Sam Wells. Sam Wells, the former dean of the chapel at Duke, and is now the rector of vicar at St. Martin's in the Field in London, says the most important theological word is the word with. And Peter Story, that we both share a close friendship with, Peter Story says the most theological word in the English language is the word all. I would suggest that we put those together and say the most theological words are God with all. And if God is with all, or as we say in the Methodist tradition, if we really believe in prevenient grace, that it's universally present, we don't take God places, we find God. We go where God is, and God isn't confined to the church, the walls of the church. In fact, I think God is knocking on the door of the church, wondering when you're going to come out here and live in the world. But you reminded me, you are aware of my longtime friendship with Bill Grosclose, who lived on death row for some 25 years. When he got a new trial and then was released from death row, he told me the story of that the first time he had touched grass in I don't know how many years. And his great pleasure was going outside, and he saw a rabbit munching on grass, and how transformative that was for him. So
you called our friend's name Harmon Ray, and he and I and Richard Good, professor at Lipscomb University, started SALT, Schools for Alternative Learning and Transformation. And one of the things we did was take college classes, particularly theological classes, seminary classes, into prisons where half the students are on the inside, cannot leave at the end of the class, and half the students are from the outside. And when we started that class at Vanderbilt Divinity School, initially, PhD students were like, wow, what do you mean I have to apply? What do you mean I can't take my computer? What do you mean, blah, blah, blah. And it did not take long for them to realize that their notions of theology were going to be utterly transformed by this experience, that the theology inside actually wrestled with concretely, what does it mean to be free? What does it mean to be saved? What does liberation look like? What does it mean to step in the way of Jesus, who confronted the powers and principalities of death in the name of the God of life? What does that mean? What does it mean to claim the name that God has given us as beloved children of God? And those classes were absolutely transformative to the theologies. My hope is that one day every single seminary student will have to take a class where half of their fellow students are inside, and the course takes place inside a prison. Yeah.
But Janet, you may know that with Harmon's help, before his untimely death, we began a class at Duke Divinity School,
right,
patterned after that same pattern. and now has developed into a certificate in prison studies. But it's now even spilled over into the law school, to where lawyers
That's great.
become involved. Another experience of that, it emphasizes the importance of proximity and incarnation, being with. I learned a lot from my 10-year journey, living with my late wife with her dementia, and then serving as a chaplain of the memory care facility in the community where we lived. And I learned you have to get beyond mere intellectual, because the people and learning to get inside the world of people living with dementia. And they are among those marginalized, stigmatized, and pushed aside that are present silently in all of our churches and communities. And they can teach us a lot, because if you have to go inside their world and not attempt to change them into your world.
Right.
And that same pattern is applicable to all of us. I don't know that I've ever won over anyone through an argument or through even a rational discussion. People are changed by people and relationships, and the relationship of love, because love is an energy, and it is the power that brings creation into being. It is the power that sustains it. It is present all around us, and we're called to participate in the flow of that power. And the church is the one community that is specifically called, from our biblical story and tradition, specifically called to be a community of love.
Absolutely. I was thinking about Reverend Jim Lawson. It was his birthday on Monday. He died 2 years ago, year and a half ago. But Jim was a Methodist pastor, and he was what Dr. King called the architect of the nonviolent movement in this country. Pastor of Centenary United Methodist Church in Memphis when Dr. King was called to Memphis and executed. And recently, a couple of years ago, Reverend Lawson was speaking, and he said, we do not have to have the world in which we live. We must help unravel the movements that can turn all of us in the direction of beauty and hope and truth, using the powers of love and life that are in all of us. And I think that's exactly what you're saying. I mean, that the church is a movement that embodies a love that people can see, that listens people into life. Emily Towns, womanist theologian, talks about listening people into life, that listens people into life, which is what you did, right? I mean, I believe that in this moment in this country, pastoral care may be the most important thing that we can do, to really accompany, listen deeply. You talked about conflict earlier, and we train folks inside prisons and outside in the community on conflict transformation. And one of the things we train in is strategic listening. So you listen to what's underneath the words. You listen knowing that you're quick to want to invent your own version of a story, but there's a third story that comes if you listen long enough that you'll never get unless you set aside your story and just sit and listen for a minute. What would happen if churches became places that actually went out to listen to communities? They didn't start with programs. They didn't start with ideas of what they were going to do for or to people. They actually started by simply listening and knowing that that was the key to whatever comes next. Because I think that's what Jesus did.
Well, yes. And I think the preposition is so important that to get back to that, we so often look at ministry or mission as programmatic.
Right.
And we've got to do something for someone or to someone. Even the little book I wrote on ministry with the forgotten, dementia through a spiritual lens, even the publishing house wanted to title it Ministry 2. And my response was that only further objectifies people living with dementia. Nobody wants to be somebody else's project, including the church. And so much of our evangelism historically has been that I've got Jesus and I'm going to get him to you. We don't hold Jesus in our possession. So the proximity, I think, is so critically important, and entering into the world of the other. And Janet, you've had a lot of experience in local churches and in other nonprofits. What are some of the practices specific practices that you have found helpful?
I think
about transformation.
Sure. For me, I think one of the most powerful pieces has been participatory Bible study, because it seems to me that clergy have occupied the hearing, interpretation, and practice of Scripture, and often distorted what that is in order to protect the institution. It's astounding to me what happens when people are invited to enter a story rather than listen to it as if it was from long ago and is going to bring me a word of comfort. But so I think of often the story of Matthew 15. We were talking about the being changed by others. Matthew 15, the Canaanite woman, I think Jesus is transformed by her. I think Jesus listens to her long enough to be confronted about his narrow theology, and then reimagines what it is that he means to be, is called to be about. He will never utter those kinds of words again in that story. Or I think of Mark 10, the rich man coming to Jesus and asking, what must I do to inherit, and go and sell everything you've got. And the line that gets me in that story is Jesus, looking at the man, loved him and said, doesn't that redefine what it means to be loved by Jesus? I mean, that's hard. Even the disciples are going to go on after that story and say, wow, that's really a difficult thing. And I, over and over in the congregations I have worked with, it has been participatory Bible study that has invited people back into the story to hear it as their own. So, for example, in Lawrence County, where I'm the first woman to serve as pastor in a 13-county area, and there's a whole lot of anger over that, and one church pulls out of the thing, threatening to burn down the church before a woman will preach. And they don't know me, so they don't actually disagree with my theology. I'm just a woman coming into this space. But we do participatory Bible study with the congregations and with the community. And we do Luke 13, the bent over woman, bent over 18 years, quite unable to stand. And Jesus calls her in. She doesn't ask for anything. She's not disturbing anyway. She's way on the edges of the community. Jesus calls her in and names her a daughter of Abraham. So we deal with that story. And the first night, they just spend all this time talking about, what is it that bends women over double? We're in a county in Appalachia, so it's poverty, and it's women who are battered and bruised by men. The sheriff was reelected 2 weeks after he beat his wife in public so badly that she ended up in the hospital. 2 weeks later, he's reelected. There are no women in any positions of power. Battering women is common in the county and justified because men are the head of the house. What does it mean for women to be bent over double? And how would you ever stand up straight? Well, they don't finish this story because there's so much thickness to it, and they decide they have to do it the next week. And the next week, they talk about, what does it mean to be called a daughter of Abraham? What would it have felt like if the theology in the community had belittled you, had justified your suffering, had excluded you, had said you were not worth? And then suddenly this one says not only is all that wrong, but you're central to this community. You're a part, you're a partner, you're a beloved belonging to this. Wow, wow, what? And said it in front of everybody, all the people who had called her, all those other names. What would that feel like? They don't finish with the story, and they do it a third week. And the third week they say, why would she remain standing up straight? The folks in charge are hollering, they're angry, they're really mad. Jesus is moving on to the next place. What would keep her stand? I mean, she would have adjusted by now. 18 years she's been there now. It'd be a struggle to stand up straight. It'd be painful. She'd have to learn everything, all that. Why even bother to step into that conflict? Why not just bend back over? And they decide it's because of the community. And when she forgets that she's been named a daughter of Abraham, a child of God, they will remind her, because they will walk with her in this struggle. That's on a Wednesday night. On a Saturday, Joanna calls at 2 a.m. in the morning, and I guess by then it's Sunday morning. Everyone knows that her husband, one of the wealthiest families in the county, beats her with some regularity. And she has been kicked with steel-toed cowboy boots, and has cuts all over. And I take her to the hospital, and I hear what I've heard before. The doctor says, could you just not have kept your mouth shut? And then sews up the stitches, and we bring her back to our house, the parsonage. And I'm at the worship service where her family worships the next morning. And we're in a moment of prayer, so asking for celebrations and concerns. And Joanna walks into the back of the church and just stands there. By now her face is swollen and the colors are coming, and people can see that the battering has happened. And she's just standing there, tears running down her face, and I have not the slightest idea what to do. And then her sister-in-law, so the sister of the man who beat her, stands up and says, you are a daughter of Abraham. And then other folks start standing up and saying, you are a daughter of Abraham. And those congregations go on to start the largest battered women's shelter in rural Tennessee. Wow. The power of the gospel is absolutely astounding if we invite people into the story rather than imposing our own interpretations on them. When they see themselves in the gospel, when they hear the connections and experience the healing over and over again, that's been a reality for me. And then that spills into participatory worship. So at Hobson, we invited people from the streets to stay with us and eat with us and feast with us and join Bible study. And then on Sundays, that shows up. So we are collective. So whoever offers the sermon, and it often was not me, comes out of that community Bible study, tries to pick up the pieces from that. And afterwards, there's a conversation. And so I'd had people, I mean, Hobson was an incredible gift, but it was like a ride, a thrill. You couldn't tell what was coming. And I've had people who stand up and say, oh, whoa, hold up. You totally forgot about whatever. I mean, that it was a conversation, right? So that we can't understand the gospel on our own. We need a community that will help us here. And I use your quote, a community that will hold us and hold us accountable. A community that will walk with us and will pull us in with both challenge and gift. That was a long answer, sorry.
Well, it's a wonderful answer, Janet. Thank you so much. It did remind me, just a simple statement that Fred Craddock made years ago, that you really don't understand. You really can't understand the power of the gospel until you put yourself in the stories in the scripture.
Right.
And unless we see ourselves as participants in that story and identify at different times of our lives with different characters. But one of the things that I have found helpful over the years has been to try to create safe spaces for dialogue and interaction. And that has to be done carefully, but creating, and I think that one of the ways the church could be in this divisive world that we live in currently, is to be be that community where people can come together to discuss critical, important issues in a space and hear various stories.
Right.
One illustration of that was when I was the pastor in Oak Ridge, and we invited the bishops to come. They were working on their document on the nuclear crisis, and here is the community where 50% of the economy of the community is based on the production of nuclear weapons, or it was at that time. And so we invited the bishops to come and enter into dialogue with the scientists, the engineers, and the managers of those involved in the production of nuclear weapons. And it really was a weekend in which there was just open conversation, dialogue, and we set the pattern for it by saying, let's agree on certain principles. And one of which is all of us want peace. We may have different images of how that's come about. And there were persons who were in Oak Ridge at the time who had actually helped to produce the nuclear bomb. And they were members of the congregation that I served. So I knew something up there. They loved peace too. They wanted peace. They knew the dangers of war. But so let's agree on some principles, but let's also agree that none of us are totally innocent in our participation in this system of the production of weapons of war. Since 50% of the economy of Oak Ridge was based on those weapons, 50% of my salary was derived. And since we paid all of our apportionments, including the Episcopal Fund, then it meant part of the bishop's salaries were derived from the production of weapons, so that we all come with a sense of humility, mutual confession, and mutual longing for peace, but also to create opportunities to move outside of our homogeneous communities. It was in Oak Ridge, for example, Janet, Forrest Harris, with whom you worked at, he was the pastor of Oak Valley Baptist Church. And we decided to engage in an annual exchange ministries. We exchanged choirs. We did a joint study, for example, of Martin Luther King's vision of beloved community. And when the sessions were held at Oak Valley Baptist, I did the leadership. It was at First Oak Ridge. He did the leadership. Our choirs exchanged. Well, there still exists in Oak Ridge a group that grew out of that experience called the Joy Reconcilers. They developed friendships across, it broke down prejudices. For example, one of the leaders, the chairman the chairperson of the group from Oak Ridge was calling the chairperson of the group from Oak Valley. And the chairperson from First Church Oak Ridge said, well, you know, I'm really glad we're doing this, but she confessed this to the total group in a closing dinner one night. She said, I was glad we were going to have this, but I assumed I had no prejudices. I'm not from Oak Ridge. She grew up in Pennsylvania or somewhere northeast. And she said, but when I was given the number of Claire, the chair of the person at Oak Ridge or Oak Valley, it was an office number at the laboratory, and I assumed she was the secretary when she was the department head. So I learned just by getting acquainted. Well, they became friends. They attended weddings together, so forth. So just creating spaces where we do communicate across our barriers with a sense of humility and a mutual longing for a new tomorrow, a new future, a transformed future.
Right. And I think that part of the invitation for congregations is to figure out how to move out of the walls so that they encounter the different voices. So they, like you, create spaces where people are safe to feel differently about things, but can still communicate. A member of our National Council of Elders, we're all nonviolent organizers from the 20th century who haven't quit. Loretta Ross started one of the first reproductive rights centers, women's shelter in DC, after experiences of abuse. And she's written a new book called Calling In. And she runs college courses on calling in instead of calling out. As she worked with C.T. Vivian in Atlanta at his center, a civil rights worker, and early on was assigned with working with a Klansman who wanted to come out of the Klan, the Grand Dragon, no less. And she was like, she's a Black woman, say, oh, hell no. Well, I haven't got time for that stuff. I am fighting all the white supremacy that surrounds me all the time. No, I don't have time for somebody who's invested their life. But C.T. Vivian said, that's what our work is about. Healing and transformative love and engaging in a larger vision of the world. And so she did. And the book really reckons with what it would mean in this particular moment to call people in instead of calling out, and underlining how quick so many of us are to cancel someone, to write them off, to say, no way I'm ever going to have a conversation with that person. And instead, what happens when we are broken open by the conviction that love really will speak the last word and is infinitely more powerful than any of the other forces that are coming our way. And I often told Walter Wink that he saved me when I went to Lawrence County down on the Alabama border. Because when I found his work about its powers and principalities occupying communities, nations, worlds, rather than sort of simply individual choices, and our task then is to unmask, name, engage, and transform the powers and principalities, it helped me make sense of what was going on. And that then invites us to do the calling in, because we see it's not simply like rotten people. It's powers and principalities of death and destruction that continually bombard folks, work on us all the time, so that Walter Brueggemann would argue we forget the language of love because we are inundated with the language of empire. We can't even imagine a different world because the empire has so shaped the world we live in. Yeah.
Well, what sustains you? I mean, I think you have shared that the power of the gospel sustains you, but these are particularly difficult, challenging times, and it's easy to lose our sense of hope, our sense of equilibrium, and to hold on to the vision that love ultimately wins. What does sustain you, Janet, in this turbulent time?
Part of it is the circles inside prison, to see people who are day by day assaulted. I think of the death row circles, where people choose to embody love for each other, love for themselves, love for a world that has written them off, said they have no right to breathe, hopes they die soon. We've trained 14 mediators on death row, and so they have transformed the unit. So to see people who are hardest hit bet everything on love gives me hope. To walk, I walk almost every day, and there's a Japanese translation of a walk in the woods that is, the trees are bathing us with themselves. And I have a mantra that's just, well, I'm a part of creation. The trees are bathing me with themselves, and they're getting rid of all this junk I have accumulated during the day. I'm a part of creation, this huge, unimaginably beautiful thing. And that's the second piece, beauty. because every place there's some moment of beauty that's striking. And the third then is body. I'm 77 and it's still working. Yay. I still feel things. And the last is gratitude. So I go over that over and over again. Creation, beauty, body, gratitude. To inhale the beauty. Dorte Zole, German theologian, would say to practice amazement. And she had 3 things we're supposed to do every day that I've tried to do. Practice amazement, really practice amazement. Unlearn and let go, because we're all holding on to stuff we've been taught that we don't need. It is not true. Won't get us to the places we want to be that are framed by love. And the third is we resist in order to heal, and we heal in order to resist. We resist the powers of death in order to heal and become a part of the movement of love and life. And we do that as individuals and communities, and we heal so that we can resist. Those are things that get me through. And you, what gets you through?
Well, I hold on to the conviction, and I firmly believe that love will have the last word. That is our mutual friend Ted Tex Sample has often said. God bats last, and it's a walk-off home run. And
Yeah.
there are days that, but to see small expressions of the flow of love, and when I'm really most down, if I just get out of myself and make contact with someone who is hurting, I find new vitality. Somebody who is lonely may go make a visit at the local healthcare center, or someone who is experiencing grief and loss, but just to do something, some connection where there is suffering, loneliness, and hurt. And I find healing.
I see Kevin's back on, so I don't know if I have time to say one more thing.
Oh, you have all the time in the world. I just wanted you to know.
I do have all the time.
I am still here. I just wanted to let you know that. Go on.
It's coming. So I was going to quote Zohara Simmons, who I mentioned before, who was a part of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Mississippi Freedom Summer, so many other things. Zohara Simmons was in Mississippi, rural Mississippi, during Freedom Summer 1964, so a time when folks were murdered. And she was knocking on doors in rural Mississippi, inviting people to join the freedom movement, inviting people to register to vote, to believe another world was possible, to become part of the movement of love and life that Lawson talks about. And she talks about how discouraging it was, because most people just slammed the door in her face because they were scared. I mean, the Klan was real. The white supremacists were out there. It wasn't a threat. It was real. They saw death on a regular basis. And so she remembers knocking on this one particular door and expecting for someone to slam the door, cut the conversation short. And so she goes through an invitation into this freedom movement, and the woman opens the door wide and says, "Come on in, girl. I've been waiting for you my whole life." And I think that's the world right now. And the church is being invited to knock on doors, to embody a large, transformative, healing, radical, revolutionary, disruptive, system-changing love, because people are hungry for an authentic hope, for a healing that lasts more than a moment, and for a vision of a world that yet can be. Yeah.
Amen.
And I should add that on Thursday night, if you look at the website, National Council of Elders or kingandbreakingsilence.org, you will find that we're offering a webinar quoting Dr. King from Chaos to Community. Zohara will be there. Namtambe Tutu will be there. Lots of other good folks. Please join us.
Well, thank you, Janet. It's been wonderful to be in conversation with you, as it always is. You inspire me, you inform me, you challenge me, and I'm grateful to consider you and to count you as a dear friend. So
I
thank you.
need 3 more days of your wisdom to get through the week. So I'm not sure how we're going to program that, but yes, I always experience time with you as a gift. And I'm so deeply grateful for who you are and how you are. Yeah, as Bill Barnes used to say, you're a blessing person. Yep, you are a sign and a wonder. Thanks.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you so much.
Well, you're not getting off that easy. I have one more
Oh.
question, and our folks out there have sent in some questions for you. So
Oh, okay.
if you have a question, there's a questions over on the side of your screen. A couple of you have already sent in questions. Feel free to fill that out. I want to ask you something. I'm going to ask you to keep your answers kind of short since we are coming up on an hour.
And
but
you
I
know
do want to
that's
ask
hard.
this, as you look back over your years in ministry, what's one thing, if you had it to do over again, you would do differently?
I would fight for me. I would learn and practice ways of engaging the community in shaping the community in accordance with our doctrines, as I mentioned earlier, not simply teaching them cognitively, abstractly, but how do we engage? Or it's like the interactive Bible study. I would do the same thing with our great affirmations of faith. Okay, what does it mean to be made in the image of God, and how do I help to shape communities that would embody those realities?
I think I would try to figure out how to more effectively engage the larger institution that puts so much pressure on pastors to perform, to produce numbers and money. And so figure out how to build systems for people inside the institution so that they can begin to move in some different directions. I mean, I remember being in Lawrence County, impoverished county. I think the average household income was $12,000 a year. Very few people graduated from high school, let alone went on, resources scarce. And the institution wanted us to do a building campaign for the larger Tennessee conference. You just say, no, no, that doesn't fit with the gospel story.
I'm a little upset that we didn't do this last week, because Sunday I taught my Sunday school class on the story of Jesus and the woman in Matthew 15. And so I could have used your thoughts on
such
Sunday.
a powerful story.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. A couple of things that came in from viewers. If you have a question for our folks, just send those into your questions area. Randolph wrote in and asked, where can he find the quote from Reverend Lawson?
Well, I can send it to him. I have lots of quotes from Jim Lawson. That particular quote may not exist, or it might on nationalcouncilofelders.org. You could try there. We have podcasts. I can't remember in particular if that speech is on there. There's also a James Lawson Institute on Nonviolence at Vanderbilt Divinity School. They would probably, I'm on the board. Sorry, I can't be more specific, but yes, I can send it to you at least.
It's so that, what was that website for the National Council again? National Council of
It's
Elders?
just nationalcouncilofelders.org or kingandbreakingsilence.org. Either one will get you to our work.
Great. On the screen, well, you will in just a moment. I forgot to hit the button. There we go. On the screen, if you want to see the recording of this hour, a little over an hour, in the next few days, you'll find it on YouTube, and that's the shortcut that will get you there. So if you'd like to visit that, it's msb.press/clergyconvo, and you can find all of the different conversations we've had. Another question that came in, what would be a good first step? You talked about a lot of things congregations have done, could do. What would be a good first step to lead a congregation toward nurturing communities of compassion and justice?
I go back to participatory Bible study. I mean, I think in particular of a story like Mark II, which was significant at a historically Black congregation I was part of. So the story of the dismantling of the roof. And what does it mean for us to look for what's in the way of healing happening in the community? So when people are participating in this story and they're the man who's lowered on the mat, they're Jesus walking into a standing room only thing that is then disrupted with dirt falling down. They're this crew of people who are carrying the man. Who people are yelling at, who are dismantling private property, who are surely going to get arrested for public vandalism. And, you know, when people occupy those different places, or they're the religious authorities who are really, really mad that their service is upset, when people occupy those spaces and have to come up with that, who that person is and why they do what they do. So I'm the religious authority. Not everybody gets to be Jesus every time, or I'm the people on the crew, or I'm the man on the mat. Whoa, that's hard. Things shift. People begin to hear their own stories in that story, and they hear the challenge of it, not just a short clip on, and so that's what this means for this week. And you can think about this one sentence and be hopeful and comforted. No, what does it mean to have this community collective dismantling of public property because you believe healing is possible? Whoa, that's a long conversation. That's a church changer right there.
I would think also a first step might be just surveying who is in your community that you don't recognize that's there. Who are the forgotten, hidden people? And some of them are in your congregations. Who's missing? Who's not at the table? Who's not present? And do even demographic studies of your community. Well, what's the community like? When I was as a bishop and arriving into a community where I was to perhaps preach the next day and arriving on Saturday, I would walk the neighborhood where the church is. And I would often stop and ask at a local market, can you give me directions to a particular church to which I was speaking? I would suspect that in 50 to 60% of the time that I would ask, the people didn't know where it was. And many of them were within sight of it. I remember, for example, going into Dyersburg, Tennessee. First church, Dyersburg, is right across the street from the market where I was filling up my car with gas. When I went in to pay, I said, is that the Methodist church across the street? And the person said, I don't know. So I find that people who live within sight of the church doesn't know that the church exists. And when they did know it existed, they very seldom defined it in terms of its physical location or its physical appearance. They would say, oh, that's the church that has a particular ministry. So I would suggest it's not just location, location, location. It's mission, mission, mission. It's relationship, relationship. So be acquainted with the people in your community, whether they are part of the congregation or not. But one thing is just to know the nature of your community and the demographics, and much of that is available through the census reports.
I think you just came up with the title for your next book. It's Mission, Mission, Mission. This has been fascinating. I turned my camera off because I was just sitting here staring at you the whole time y'all were talking. I'm sure everybody, I was so hoping you wouldn't ask me anything because I would have to come out of my gaze to answer. So thank you both so much. Do either of you have anything you'd like to say to our group before we leave?
I'm just grateful for those who have joined with us, and if there's any way that I can be of assistance as you move forward, please don't hesitate to be in touch. I'm delighted to be in touch by email or other contact. I'm happy to discuss issues with you. My goal is to
know what your email address is. Would you share your email address?
Yes, it's KCARDER kcarder0266@gmail.com.
kcarder0266 at
And I
Gmail.
can add mine. It's JLWOLF@comcast.net. I'm glad to
Say that one more
hear
time.
from folks. JL, you have to put the L in there because J Wolf doesn't answer my emails. JLWOLF@comcast.net. I'll think of 20 things I wish I'd said 2 minutes from now. Love to hear from you.